Style. Style surrounds us. Style defines our products, our brands. It can define who we are as individuals. It can be used to blend in or stand apart. And while viral trends can change the mood of markets overnight, we still have the need to make our artwork personal because each of our customers, our guests, our readers are unique, and we need to be able to appeal to each of them, customizing our content at the speed of a click. Today we are going to see how slight tweaks in how we produce and manage image production will open up this mighty reservoir of power. We're going to take a look at producing with speed while remaining secure and customizing at scale. These are but incremental steps that tune our products, giving us true artistic agility. Today we're going to be injecting artwork into a dystopian sci-fi novel called Time's End. And we're going to be doing this so we can create a unique, customized experience for the reader. When we build our pixels so that they can be shaped in real time, we unlock this capability. When we build our pixels so that they structurally define themselves, we can set new standards for collaboration and speed through the pipeline. About a year ago, a colleague of mine came into a meeting and announced that they were leaving the company. And you say, leaving the company? Turns out they got a book deal. They found a big publisher. This was the moment that they had worked for, and they were retiring from their day job. About 3 weeks later, this author was at war with the publisher, in complete agony over the cover art, the artwork that goes on the cover. And it's interesting because this points out how images sell books. So let's follow the journey of our content, coming from the creative and going all the way into the end product. First, we need to identify a storytelling framework for our modern EPUB. Let's look at Technitail and the capabilities within. So we have our standard sequence of chapters, and we're injecting media in between those chapters and within those chapters. Pretty much all the same conceptually as an EPUB today. However, in Technitail, that media is actually brought in as layers in what's called styleables. Styleables takes the media and makes sure that it maintains its layered structure as it comes in, and because you retain that layered structure, now you can colorize it in real time. So yes, for the artist, we are now putting layers in the front end. We are able to deliver layers in real time to our readers and our customers. And this is a big deal because we're taking the raw assets and branding them on the fly, thus speeding our stylistic time to market, personalizing every customer experience along the way. This will enable us to capitalize on viral moments, the ability for us to morph the style and the color palette. Using the power of the cloud, we can respond to what's happening on the ground, and we could treat each customer uniquely. So this novel, Time's End, is using a combination of Technitail and styleables to allow the reader to immerse themselves. They're choosing how they interact with the book. They're choosing their color palette. They're choosing their media viewing option so that they can tailor the experience to themselves. And Time's End is a dystopian sci-fi novel, so there needs to be this offering of media and the ability to go into dark mode, and more importantly, dark mode on our graphics. Okay, in case you missed it, there's a mystery box. To all my friends in publishing, to all my friends in product, you got to stick around because I guarantee it will be a game changer. So let's take a look at a shot life cycle. It's one thing to work on an image on your desktop in isolation, cropped on your screen, and it's entirely different to then look at that image on the final product in context with whatever medium it's being shown. That could be a website, an ebook, an advertisement, or actually physical products sitting on the shelves. We want to enable that artist to see in context the artwork that they're creating by knowing the medium they're creating for. Styleables has a UI that allows us to view and tweak image palettes. So we're looking at collections of artwork that allow us to change color palette, and we can see everything side by side. We get this cinematography-like feel for how we're creating our product. And by doing this, we're going to enable the artist to know the medium they are creating for. So we want to start with a Styleables baseline. We want to enable collaboration between all the teams. We need to make sure that everyone sees the shot the same way, from the producer, the creative, and the designer, so that they're all understanding the angle, the basic lighting, the context within the product. When we baseline, that enables everybody to see the general idea through the same lens, and it facilitates the product being refined as the artwork is being refined. And in this whole situation, we are abstracting away the color palette and moving it downstream so that we can change the color palette at any time we want. So this is a shot in the Times End story where our main character, Caress, finally sees this building that she's been trying to go after, and she's coming up out of the ground and gets this shot to finally see this destination that she's been traveling to for some time. And so how does this all function? Well, Styleables is just strategic layering, which is not new, but it's strategically layering, having the concept of the color palette of the end product in mind. So if we look at these three layers that are being broken out, the top one is a glow, so that's a screen effect. In the middle, we've got our foreground, and then the bottom, we have our background. And what we're doing is we're looking at the end result, which is our novel, and we're taking the CSS style palette of that page, and then we're going to be injecting that into this layered palette on the fly. That way, we can pound out multiple renditions of this, multiple derivatives based upon whatever design the designer is defining as the end color palette. So on the left, we just have strategic styling with textures, and on the right, we've got our color palette. So in order to understand the importance of baselining, let's look at some shots that didn't go through baselining and what that meant to our creative process. So here on our first shot, which is starting to be refined already, it's way too wide. That's never going to play nice with mobile. So now all this work on refining this shot it needs to be thrown away. So then we take a look at it again, and we look at it more in portrait mode, which is great, but the challenge with that is it's very tower-like, and when you try to go wide on a desktop, that's not going to work either. So if we were to let the artist continue to work in their silo on that shot, they're looking at it and okay, it's starting to look great inside of this small window that they've made to emulate mobile, but when you blow that out, it looks terrible. So then we end up with the baseline, and the baseline is what gives us a pretty much a square image. It will flex to both desktop and mobile, and then that is dropped into the actual product itself, enabling our designers to go, graphic to go, and everybody's on the same page. So let's recap. We've got a combination of Technitail using Styleables to create a unique experience for each and every reader. A creative supply chain is essential to how we produce our product. And we need to move with speed, we need to keep technology out of the way, and we need to remain secure. So let's look at a little bit of the roles involved in it. For the most part, our creative pipelines today are very linear based. So we've got the creative on one end, we've got the product or the designer at the end of the chain, and we have some sort of producer or director in the middle. And this is a linear process that can take several months. And the downside today is that both ends of the pipeline have to be on the same page when it comes to color palette. We've got creative, okay, we're deciding on a color palette of blue, we're doing blue hues. Okay, creative, go, start working. Okay, the designer starts working, and they're working on their CSS for the front end. And we're working over months, and the director in the middle is looking at the overall artwork style being put out, making sure it's consistent, making sure it's what we want it to be. The designer is looking at the website and making sure there's all kinds of accents of color on the front end in the UI or the novel. And then what happens if the color palette has to change? So suddenly you have to go back and repeat this process because all of a sudden all the creative has to be done again because we have to go update our color palettes at the beginning of the pipeline. And in today's world on the designer side, it's not really a big deal because CSS, you could just wham. You could just throw in some CSS and refabricate the whole website within 5 minutes, right? But on the creative side, because we're baking in all our colors, it's very, very ineffective. So in this pipeline, the creative is basically flattening their image to the creative director. And the creative director is looking at a bunch of flat images. And that's our mistake. We don't need to do that. We can make sure that we're retaining our strategic styling going to the director and the designer. And thus we decouple the designer and the creative and have the flexibility to stylize later. So let's do a quick recap. We've shifted the style finalization further down the pipeline towards the director and the designer. We're using strategic layering up front, which is not new, but we want to be working in terms of textures. And all of this is using the Styleables UI to work locally, so we're securing our IP because we can render locally. We only use the cloud, or we only go outbound when we want to or need to. And again, it's worth noting here that the Styleables UI is really targeted towards the designer or the director or the producer. It accepts any type of creative output coming upstream. That's Photoshop, Maya, whatever you have that's creating your layers, doesn't matter. Styleables picks up in order to aggregate those layers at scale across multiple collections so that the designer and the producer can then manipulate it as if they were the user customizing it for themselves. And this is where we get the benefit of responding to changes in the marketplace very rapidly because we can throw all this at the cloud for processing. So let's say goodbye to the linear pipeline. And to the creatives, you got to bear with us because we're going to be talking about creative agility through iterative artwork. So in the software development world, there's this process called Agile. Its purpose is to develop code and to be transparent and collaborative and to make sure that there's no surprises. It's iterative execution with an eye on velocity. And for those of you who doubt that coding practices can be used to develop art, yeah, it can. Once we begin to iterate over our artwork, we begin to massively widen our ability to collaborate across the organization. And we begin to work hand in hand with our product partners. We're being masterful in making our artwork repurposable. We have replaced the idea of a style guide with a living styling machine. A big knob where the licensee or the creative director can now just turn it. This is the degree to which we are extending our reach. Can I unveil the mystery box now? So now what in the world could be in this box that's so magical? I just can't wait. So let's step back and look at the pipeline in its most primitive form. So in the upstream portion, we've got the creative repository, and that's pretty much like a graph database. It's a creative Wild West, and frankly, it doesn't want to be managed, and it shouldn't be managed. It's a decentralized file structure for the act of creation, and we should not try to govern or put any type of constraints in that universe. What we want to make sure is that everything flowing out of there then just gets normalized and conformed into our strategic layers. And that's where the commonality of Styleables makes that a common normalized definition. And once we have that common normalized definition, we can then create multiple derivatives, and all those derivatives then are just child offspring dynamically. So really it's about the middle ground of us normalizing what's coming out of there in a way that we're not committing to the style. We're just normalizing the creative content, and then we're pushing the stylistic rendering down the pipeline towards the product or the design side. And what's super interesting when you start to look at it that way is there's this huge opportunity to have assisted AI in between the creative repository and stylables. And the reason is because artists are already great at making masks. So they already know the concepts of masking, and they're creating these masks that could define where are the eyes, what is the arm, here's the skin tone. On their own layers, then computers can start to understand, because it's very surgical information coming out of the creative repo in a way that artists are already doing it. And so we can become intelligent to maybe start to inject ethnicity into our artwork. I mean, if we know where the skin tone is, and we can isolate the skin tone layer, then we can start to change the ethnicity on the fly. What we've got in this box down here in the lower right corner is sentiment. Technitail has sentiment analysis around all of this. So we can then start to look into what is driving conversion. What color palettes are being used to move product? What stylistic choices are enabling our readers to go further and further into the book? I mean, what happens when we start having sentiment data around stylistic preferences of our customers? The publishing industry is just ripe for this kind of immersive visual storytelling. What we're looking at now is a work in progress, a sequence of stylables that are maturing with textures, strategically designed to be flexible. We're not just slapping images on our products, we are reaching out to our customers to share the experience. Our products will leave a lasting impression with the humanistic touch. It is now up to us to learn how to manage artifacts in groups. It is up to us to now learn how to version control throughout the different layers. It is up to us to maximize our reservoir of creative content. So get out there and get in your customer's face and make it personal. Can I take this microphone off now? Trust me, they are sick of hearing me talk already.
Hi, I'm Graham Allen with Claris IP, and I'll help moderate the Q&A now and work through the questions you've submitted during the presentation. And please do keep those questions coming in as we're talking here. So Charles, there's a lot in what you just showed us. Maybe we can start with the artist perspective. How would you say this changes things for the artist? What does this mean for the artist?
Yeah, so from the artist perspective, I really think it shines a spotlight on understanding what is the final output of your product. I can't stress enough that sitting on your desktop and doing, inside your creative tool, an image, without understanding either the breadth or the color palette or the patterns going on around your image when it's in its final state, drastically affects the composition. So it's really about, we need to understand and provide transparency or a way to mold and morph into that final context. The other thing I would point out is that it also shines a spotlight on the importance of layering and how you do your layering, and thinking about how your artistic layers can be reused or repurposed. I mean, from the business perspective as well, you want to have, tremendous return on asset. You want to be able to have the artist create a base implementation that you can use in multiple ways. And so from the artist perspective, it's actually a new creative outlet that you're sitting there saying, wow, I can create this layer that will dynamically, draw this into the future, or I can create a layered system that will enable somebody else to interpret it this way. And it's also, a huge opportunity for the collaboration because, as we stated, when you're talking about a linear pipeline, you're talking about time. So bouncing to the business perspective, again, it's like stylistic time to market. How quickly can you get to market? And a big problem in today's industry is that it just takes too long. And so being able to understand that I am creating a framework that can, mold in different ways is actually a new creative freedom that you have for newfound expression.
So you mentioned layers there. Actually, we had a question come in from the audience around layers. You've shown us sort of a nice example of how this works with images. What other media formats or media types do you see this being applied to, like 3D or videos, or how far do you think this can go?
That's a good question. To be honest, you never say never. Again, it comes back to thinking about what you're really trying to produce. So in theory, the answer is yes. You can use that all across the board. I would say, however, that the 3D world is very used to rendering things in real time, and it's very used to shader composited rendering. So in that sense, the tool sets that exist in that space are built for that perspective. If you bounce over to video or movies, there are plenty of tools that actually have the concept of using layers to go at 24 frames per second. So I don't know that you would necessarily put those in those two worlds because the perspective is different. It almost begs the question of video versus 3D because this is really about customization. Let's just pause there. It's personalization. Like, what does this experience mean to you as the consumer in this moment? So now you're sitting there saying, looking at the video world, can they morph to something like that? But video games kind of do that all day long. So you got video games that's like, I can control where the camera is and I can move and I can go over here. And then you've got video, which is extremely high-end, 24 frames per second. That's baked in, extravagance. I would say that you'd really have to think about that product perspective and see whether or not it's applicable. Because to me, the gap I personally have seen is really in the 2D space.
A lot of what you just talked about there sort of speaks to pipeline and the workflow. How much of a transformation of pipeline and sort of pipeline mindset do you see this?
Oh, that's a really good question too, because the crazy part about this is it's actually just incremental steps. Because today, a lot of these concepts are already being deployed. When there was a time when digital started growing, and I remember when iPads came out. It's like you looked back at the repository and you said, we have a background and we have a character of our background. And if you went into the photo editing tool and you turned off the character, you would find that the background was not painted behind the character because it is like there was no concept of like that layer. So those I think have already been taken care of as far as, hey, nowadays, if you're smart, you are making sure that every layer can hold up. So, in the early days when we were talking about ebooks, they would do that thing, I think it's parallax scrolling, where you could move the book and the character would slightly shift over the background. So basically you're implying that you need to be, have that background be solid so that you're moving the character over it, right? But this is actually, when you pause and go one step deeper, it's a matter of saying, well, how can I take that one layer and make sure it's articulated in a way that we can not commit to anything, right? And so we're already doing these practices. It's just a matter of being more and more clean or more and more methodical, I guess. And you know what? Let me point out something real quick. There's a danger here because you never want to inhibit creativity. So I think maybe from an analogy perspective is if you're, writing down notes and you're just, you got paper and you're scribbling on it, and then you're like throwing it over your shoulder because now you're moving on, you're trying something else, you're throwing it over, and then you end up with a pile of papers behind you. And so that is kind of the creative process where it's just big pile, and then at the end you've got that one picture. It's like, okay, that's the picture. But maybe it's either going back slightly in that moment to say, instead of having that piles of paper, maybe we just have sticky notes that are kind of like in categories, so that at least we can come back and retether our way and how we got here, right? So anything I've described right now really isn't revolution. In fact, that doesn't change any of your tool sets. It's just more process and methodology. So I think the incremental step in starting to instigate this change is small.
What do you think that means then for training for the artists, learning for the artists? What sort of adaptation do the artists need to contemplate as they embark on this?
Yeah, that's another great point. There's, to my knowledge, there's zero training. It's just more a matter of thinking about when you are having those layers, can they be created so that they are complete? Right? You can have, so if you're using masking, for example, you can have 8 different layers and with a stroke on each mask, right? But that's pretty granular. So you might want to roll that up, and so that you're thinking that this is now an objective of this layer has an objective. And so there's no training on that at all, to my knowledge. It's more a matter of thinking and being aware of, actually, let me take that back for a moment. I would say that artists really need to, if they have a slight apprehension to embracing technology, that you got to start looking in the mirror and getting over that. Like, technology is here to stay. Technology is your friend. Technology is the way that you can express in new capacity, extremely great new scalable capacity. So if you embrace that thought, and then you embrace the thought of having colleagues or other people collaborating to contribute to your final outcome, it's just that mindset. And so maybe from a organization, that may be some slight structural changes in the fact that, hey, let's go clean up our layers a little bit, and let's also create them so that, Department B can work with Department A, and we have this, ability to collaborate.
Maybe another sort of question here related to pipeline. You've sort of shown how the artists can see and visualize their art in sort of different delivery environments that were different color schemes. How about just plain old different platforms? And so the vast range of platforms from, desktop to a phone that people might end up consuming the media on. How do you make that a part of the creative experience?
Yeah, and again, knowing where you're going to end up is huge. And it's really kind of hard to sometimes know where you're going to end up because things develop that are new. So back in the era, when phones really started taking hold, the concept of portrait versus landscape, it just blew up your concept of, man, I have all this great artwork that I've created for this wide shot, and and everything in my wide shot is relevant, and it's my entire composited, frame. But then you put it in a phone vertically for portrait, and you're just done because it's just cutting off everything. So being aware of that flex space is hugely important. And the other thing, we've seen technologies that can hone in on what the computer believes is the frame of interest. Like, hey, we're going to zoom in over here on the right side because we think that's what it is. But that's really tricky because from an artist's perspective, every pixel matters. So I would say that thinking about widening your view on how you're creating. So, from what I've seen, oftentimes everything is just cropped too much. It's great, it's cropped, but and so you once you start doing that, you're building for portrait, you get used to it after a while. It's like, okay, now I'm feeling the portrait mentality. And so then you start to get proud. It's like, okay, the portrait mentality, okay, I've got this portrait thing down. But then you take that portrait and you stick it in a website and you blow it out, and it's, now you're back, right? So that's really tricky to do, Grant. I don't know the answer to that question.
I think that's part of the challenge that you're looking to solve here. And maybe since you've talked a lot about the artist angle, that is a nice lead into the other side of this, the business angle. What does this mean for the business?
Yeah. So first and foremost for the business is personalization. Like the ability to treat every customer uniquely is inevitable. Like if you're not thinking about doing that, then I don't know what to say. And the fact that the excuse of the past is that the capability wasn't there is gone. But again, embracing it allows you to just really go forth and conquer, because you're sitting there saying, I can be aware and intelligent on how I can interact with my customer on an experiential level that will mean something to them. That emotional connection. The largest companies understand that there's emotional connections in products and brands. So understanding that you want to have that emotional connection through experience, and that personalization is the way that you can get there, is a huge game changer. And like the video states, like sentiment analysis is just right there as well. So there's that. But the concept of a brand or pivoting massive amounts of, using the cloud to pivot your entire branded collection is also huge. I mean, a lot of companies put out, seasonal or some sort of cyclical guidance on, how their brand is perceived, or their, intellectual property is probably the better way to think about it. So you have intellectual property and you're putting out intermittent guidance on how that intellectual property should be presented to the final consumers. Well, right now that is a large undertaking. Any talk of trying to redo a style guide, anytime we think about redoing a style guide, it is a major thing. But this is changing that. It's just, again, the mentality of the business to say, hey, we're going to go for personalization and speed, right? And so if we're going for personalization and speed, let's just go clean up that pile of artwork that we have a little bit, dust it off and put it into slight, things that we can, somewhat organize it a little bit better using our existing tools. We're there.
What sort of maybe sort of tactical, practical advantages do you see? Are there just bottlenecks in the existing process that this removes? Is that a pitch that you could make to an executive to get them to invest in this?
That's a great question too. I mean, absolutely. There's so many tiers of linearity that makes our current processes slow, right? So it's like, whether or not you have one artist working on one shot, which then is passed to someone else, and then is passed to someone else, and is passed to someone else before it gets to the consumer, all of that goes away. So it's like you can sit there and say that we want to have multiple artists working on a shot, fabricating it in a way that, we strip out that middle portion of enrichment, flattened enrichment, and instead make it dynamic enrichment. Then theoretically, you can, I shouldn't even say theoretically, it is real. It's like you can then have two artists contributing to a work that can pivot, with an HTTP call. You're right there.
What are the barriers to just doing this today?
I think the barriers are, you really have to, as an artist, step back and say, look in the mirror and say, am I afraid of technology? Like, we all don't like to learn new tools. Anytime there's a new, we switched, I've been using Blue Jeans forever. Now we're using Zoom. It's like, I got to learn this Zoom interface now. I mean, it's going to take me 10 minutes, but I don't have this 10 minutes, right? But on a creative scale, these creatives have invested, decades into their tool, decades. It's like they're playing their violin. I know my violin. I can strum that note on my violin and I'm good at it and I can do it consistently. But it's like, this is now, you are now in a symphony. So on a symphonic level. And this is why I encourage artists to embrace it, because it is new expression. It is a new means to completely apply your intention at a large scale. So in that, the barrier is just your ability to embrace that.
Which of those barriers do you think should be tackled first? Like, what's the path to adoption? Maybe that's a better way of thinking of it. What is the path to getting this adopted as a methodology?
I think the first question is how do I preview my artwork on my product? Am I doing that? Am I sitting in my silo and I'm just putting out a JPEG and giving it to somebody else? Or am I actually seeing it on the product as I'm delivering it? I think that's step one. And then step two is, how would I describe my artwork to someone walking in who's brand new and where everything is? Like, can you open up my artwork and understand the structure of it? When do I apply a mask? Is this mask labeled properly? Is this mask, is it labeled mask eyeballs? That's something someone else can step in and say, okay, I know what that is supposed to do. And so understanding, there's a lot of tiers in that, masks are a big deal. There's a lot of tiers. And then also, are you creating constructively for the portrait and the landscape? I mean, that's a big, I would say, the other thing is, make sure that you can think about and understand portrait versus landscape and what that means to you, because there's strategic ways that you may want to handle that. It may be that, in the styleables, you're actually moving the layers. It's like, hey, when we go portrait, I want to keep centered on the characters off the side. I just want to move them in when we go to the portrait. But maybe not. Maybe, like, from a creative standpoint, you don't like that approach. But at least understanding that mechanics is there, I think that's a barrier.
What's next for the technology to make this real, or make this more real, or make this economical?
Yeah, and this is where it really pivots to the creative director. I think that where we're at right now is the technology needs to understand that we're operating in batches. I would want to hear from, or I would want to talk to technology companies out there that understand how to deal with content in batches, so that I am approving these 1,000 images as a build for my current stylistic definition that's in the marketplace. But, oh, wait a minute, something just happened in the marketplace last night, and then we need to change that definition. So I need to A, approve that, and then B, deploy that, and make sure that that we have that chain of report, and I can roll back, right? In that sense, now you are, I don't know if that's CMS. I don't know where that really lives in you. I don't know if that's a DAM definition. I don't know if that's CMS, but from a technology perspective, we have to be able to operate in batches.
Actually, an interesting question has come in from the audience here. Back on the artist perspective, what's the range of sort of controls that you see placing in the hands of the artist that end up becoming controls for the user themselves? So you showed color change as a control. What's the range? How far can the envelope of control be pushed?
I think that's where the creatives are. It's left up to your imagination. The way I think to understand that as well is go look at the stuff you don't like and ask yourself why you don't like it, and ask yourself, if it were slightly tweaked, would you be interested? The novel space, like the publishing industry, come on. A lot of it is in your mind, okay? And so when they start showing graphics, in graphic novels or whatever, it can be very abstract. And so you're inviting the user to be imaginative in their participation in the experience. And so in that, you just want to make sure that you are accounting for that interpretation. So the way I've seen, have really light bulbs go off is when I see something I don't like. I'm like, God, that's horrible. It looks horrible. But then you ask yourself, but if I could tweak the style, would I like it? And usually the answer is yes. I mean, there's a lot of analogies to music right here. You know, if you think about this one simple thing, if you're watching a movie and you don't like we're having a chase scene and you don't like the music, but you could pick this other track, that makes a huge difference. You guys would be so shocked if you take soundtracks and just change them over the exact same video sequence, like how much that dramatically changes the mood. That is what we're talking about. It's like, can I tweak? Can I just tweak a little bit? And so the answer is yes. And from that artistic perspective, it's anticipating that, making that connection to the customer.
Nice. Time for one last quick question. How can people find out more about this after we're done here?
Yeah, I know it's a lot to take in. So, you can look up Styleables, that's with the Z, and, look up there. I think, there's plenty of information, but yeah, I would encourage people to look at, reach out. And then they could also reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, of course, and I'm more than happy to sit down with anybody who's extremely interested or can contribute.
Nice. Well, thanks, Charles. Our time is up here now. There is another session a little later today on next-gen customer experiences with the Children's Place and Public Sapient. That's at 10 a.m. Pacific. For now, though, thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of ImageCon.